Many of our customers out there are running servers in a hybrid environment. They're running servers in Azure, on-prem, or at other cloud providers. And one question always comes up is, how can I manage these servers and how can I make sure that they are compliant with our company policies? So how can I make sure that every server is configured in the right way? And that is where Azure Arc for Servers comes in. So with Azure Arc for Servers, you can onboard servers which are not running in Azure to Azure Resource Manager. And then with that, you get all the rich experience and management tools which Azure Resource Manager offers. So basically what you do is install an agent on a server. This can be Windows or Linux. And then you can go out and this server shows up in the Azure portal as an Azure resource. And that enables you to use things like log analytics or, for example, Azure policy with guest configuration, where you can use policies to basically configure your operating systems and make sure that they're compliant with your company policies.
Hey everybody, it's your buddy Jay. I am back here once again. Welcome back to AzureFunBytes, where every week, what do? We get together and we talk about the products, the services, and all the things that can come together and give you an amazing experience on Azure. So last week, it's tough to top that guest. It was so great having Brendan Burns on. We talked a little bit about Azure Arc and Kubernetes-enabled Arc. And that really leads into what we're going to be discussing today. And you already saw a clip of my guest. He's really great. Let's bring him in. It's Thomas Maurer. Hey, Thomas, all the way from Switzerland. How are things going?
Hey, Jay, thank you, first of all, for having me. I feel super excited to be on your show. I mean, you always have these great guests, and it's a huge honor, obviously, to be on your show today. I also just transitioned, for those who are watching the Hello World live stream or the LearnTV live stream, I just switched from Hello World over to AzureFunBytes, which is so exciting.
Yeah, I do Hello World every week to promo what we're going to be talking about. And yesterday, Dean and Adam, both were really excited to hear that you're going to be part of the show. I know Frank and Nietzsche are great hosts over there on Hello World. I really, really enjoy doing that show. I'm pretty lucky also that it's a great lead-in for what I do. So I'm very much about it. So Thomas, we've got a lot to talk about, and we don't have a lot of time to do it. But we're gonna learn all we can about a hybrid cloud today. And to kind of get started, I want to ask our viewers a question so that they can actually let us know what are they using. And so there's the poll. We have our poll every single week. And this week, our poll asks you, do you currently use a hybrid or multi-cloud solution for your IT needs? And as always, the answers are either yes, no, or it's complicated. Because for a lot of people, it is complicated. It's not very cut and dry. And also, Thomas, let's remind everybody about something great that's going to be coming up in just a few months. It's Microsoft Build. Or I should say a few weeks, excuse me. You can go ahead and you can register for Microsoft Build at that URL right down there. As you can see, there's a bunch of really great speakers and hosts. You'll be able to watch everything for free. And you know what, Thomas? I think it was just about this time, maybe about 2 years ago, it seems, which is it's incredible to think it was 2 years. But 2 years ago, we were at our last build out on the West Coast. It was really cool to be able to be around everybody and to have those conversations. But we're doing it online. We're making sure that actually more people can participate because it's a global event that no one gets locked out.
Yeah, absolutely. And as it absolutely is free to join, right? So it's not like, I remember the times where we actually had to buy a ticket to actually go to Build, but also like for Ignite and other, and obviously that was expensive. But then also think about like people like me who are not based in the US, who actually needed to come all over. to the US for these events, which obviously was always exciting and fun, and I can't wait to do that again. However, there was not always the chance you could actually do that. And by providing these online experience and this rich online experience now, everyone, as you said, can actually like be part of that and learn about new technologies, existing technologies, and actually get something out of it.
Yeah, I really, like I said, I do really miss all being in person. And don't worry, we'll be back together at some point. You and I will be able to go and do what we do for everyone and enjoy all this. But, it's just a matter of time. The world's kind of coming back together, bits and pieces. I'm sure we'll all get back into that situation. So before I ask you a question, Tom, I want everybody to know that they can ask you questions as well. There's the chat that's like right over here in the Microsoft Learn. You can go and ask your questions there. And if you're using one of the native chat functions in, say, Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, however you're watching us today, feel free to go ahead and dump your questions over in there. I will make sure that we get to them. But first, Thomas, I have a question for you. And I think this will be an easy one. So how'd you get here?
Well, you asked me, which I made it super exciting. But to be fair,
Microsoft and all the things that you do, because you do so much.
Yeah. No, I actually. So again, I was, first of all, I want to make sure that I was waiting for you to ask that I can finally be on the show. Now, so what I did basically in the past and how I joined Microsoft, I think it's now almost 2.5 years when I joined the Azure Cloud Advocates. Before that, I worked as a cloud architect at a partner of Microsoft to actually help customers building their private but also public cloud environments. And I was also a Microsoft MVP during that time. As you just opened my blog, that's where I actually published a lot of articles. That's where I tried to, at one point, started sharing my experience, my challenges I had with technology, and actually want to provide the solutions I found to basically make them available to everyone. And at the same time, I have to be honest, also as notes for myself to actually, whenever I needed to look up something again, I was like, well, instead of just writing it down in a private notebook, let's just make it public so everyone can have a look at it. And sometimes it's even good because sometimes some of the readers came back and said, well, Thomas, there's an easier way of doing things. Mm-hmm. So it's I always learn from people who read my blogs and then comment on it. So that is basically a little bit of what I did. And at one point, Rick Claus, my current manager and friend, basically came to me and asked, hey, what do you think about working in that team at Microsoft to actually help the IT Pro audience and our customers and communities to learn more about Azure, to fill these gaps, creating content, delivering content at events and online, and then also listen to feedback. So that is currently what I'm doing.
Yeah, and you know what, Thomas, you do a great job of it. I really appreciate how, when I use this word, I use prolific. I think that the work that you do is prolific. You cover so much stuff. One of the things, I have a really good friend, his name's Mike, and he just took the Azure Fundamentals course and he passed the test. He got his exam certification. And I know it's really important to you that people check out these certs and get their information and learn about it. And, if you're following along today, there's some really great courses that you can take. There's this introduction to hybrid cloud services on Microsoft Learn. It's free. And as you can see, I got my 1,500 experience points because I did it. I did this module. And so that you can get that opportunity to get a lot of this training that on the subjects that we're going to talk about today. And so, Thomas, before we do that, let's remind everybody that if you have questions, if you want to be part of the conversation today, hit the chat. We want to hear from you. So that being said, Thomas, why don't you tell me a little bit about today's subject, which is hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, bringing it all together with Azure services.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is actually you made a great point here. We obviously talk about Azure hybrid and hybrid cloud, but what it really means for us right now, it changed a little bit over the course of time. Hybrid for us doesn't mean really just Azure and on-prem only. It really means Azure, on-premises, other cloud providers, and at the edge, right? So we really bring all that together. And I see you're perfectly prepared here. This is exactly what I'm talking about and exactly what I meant. And it's great to see it here. This is like how we bring this all together, right? And this is not just because we think that this is a great thing to do. It's actually because we see that this is what our customers are doing. And so one thing I always talk to customer how serious we take hybrid in Microsoft is that, first of all, Azure is built from the ground up to be hybrid. If you think about technologies we had out there with Windows Server, SQL databases, Active Directory, you can really combine these. And I always highlight one quote from Jason Sanders, who is actually the engineering lead of all basically the Azure services. And he said during Ignite, during the keynote, like he had directly after Satya, he said basically that hybrid is not going to be just an in-between state until everything is moved to the cloud. That hybrid is going to be an end state for a lot of our customers. And I absolutely agree with that, because there are obviously many, many reasons out there why customers would actually run in a hybrid environment. I mean, the cloud offers so many benefits, which is great, but there are reasons like data sovereignty challenges, network latencies, or no network connectivity at all, which you still need to address, right? And so that is what we are thinking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of network concerns when you're talking about bridging the gap between different networks. You're always concerned with security, identity services, and then of course, if you're working in a situation where there's some important governance around your data, or say regulations. One of the things I like to think about for people in Europe that, one day maybe we'll get something close to it here in the States is, the
GDPR.
Yes, GDPR. Excuse me, my brain it was on the tip of my tongue. GDPR, it really, really important regulations around where data is stored, how it's stored, and who can access it based on what nation they're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what our customers are looking for. And there is also a lot of obviously investment into that. And it's, again, as you said, there's network latency challenges, but also data sovereignty challenges. And it's actually funny that we actually talk about this. Then I think we announced today that in a blog post of Brad Smith, that for European customers, we actually will store and process the data within the EU itself. So there will be no more like moving data outside of the EU. So we really want to address these challenges we have there, like for customers, to actually make that happen. And so this will be obviously a process will be happening. I think we announced that we will be done in the next year. But obviously you see the blog post here. If you want to read more about it, I can highly recommend that. But still, obviously, this doesn't address all the challenges we have with hybrid, especially if you come with network connectivity. And for example, if you also don't want to just rely on the cloud or connectivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we talk about data governance and data sovereignty, we could be in situations where, we're talking about PII or specific like sensitive customer data that, one, we can't necessarily have go over the internet. It's got to be transmitted over some sort of proprietary line. And that kind of leads me into one of the things that I think is really interesting. I've been in the cloud world for, I don't know, I guess that my first real jump into was around 2011, 2012. And, connecting everything together always was, when you're talking about multiple providers, the biggest challenge, because, whether it was setting up site-to-site VPNs and using something like OpenVPN or OpenSpawn or something like that, you had to kind of do a lot of the things on your own. And so with something like ExpressLink or ExpressRoute, I forgot what it. Sorry, you're able to actually create site-to-site connections using something like a leased line. Maybe you get some dark fiber that goes between your data center and the Azure data center. You're always going to be able to have that quick, trusted connection. And so that leads me into the next thing. Last week, I talked a little bit with Brendan about Azure Arc. And so I was curious if you wanted to kind of get into Azure Arc a little bit and see about how people can start using this to help bring all their solutions together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before I talk a little bit about about Azure Arc, and I will obviously I can show you a lot of demos. So if you're watching right now, sure. I will try to show you as much as possible. But what we realized actually, and you brought this up in a perfect way, when you start this cloud world, you're going to probably use your on-prem environment. You're going to use Azure as a cloud provider, but then you probably also use other cloud providers, and you use edge locations, factories, branch offices, and stuff like that. And one of the challenges, like as you pointed out, is connecting these together. And the other part, which is very important, is also to manage these environments, right? To actually have a governance and management and security strategy and tools to actually bring that all together. And like not necessarily depending on where your service is running, to use actually tools to have that single control plane to manage all of that, right? And I think that is exactly where Azure Arc can come in. So Azure Arc basically on a very high level, what it can do is actually doing two things. So the first of all is bringing Azure Arc enabled services to any infrastructure. Now, this really is where where a customer came to us and said, well, look, we want, we love Azure SQL, for example, right? It's a great service. We want to use it, but we have this scenario where we need to use it in a place where, again, we have data sovereignty challenges, or we have no network connectivity, or the latency to the next Azure region is too high. So when a customer cannot really use our Azure services in Azure, let's take the Azure service and bring it to the customer, right? And that is what we call the Azure Arc enabled service. Now, the other part is actually then keeping control of that environment, managing that service, but also managing services which are already existing outside of your Azure infrastructure. And that is what we call the Azure Arc enabled infrastructure. And that allows us basically to connect servers, Linux and Windows, physical and virtual machines to Azure, and actually manage them as native Azure resources. And we can also add other resources like Kubernetes clusters or even SQL Server to that game as well. So that is really what I wanted to show quickly in that. And I think what better than just talking about this? Why not just show a quick demo on this?
Sure, let's do it. Whenever you're ready, here we are. So you got the portal up, and looks like you got about a bunch of resources. Why don't you tell me a little bit about them?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're familiar with Azure, you can see here I have my Azure resources here, and if I go to the All Resources tab, you can see here a list of all our cloud resources, right? And you can see here that everything here is basically an object. You can see here that object has a name. I'll zoom in here a little bit. It has a type. In this case, it can be a virtual machine, it can be a disk, it can be a database. Even a public IP address is a object, right? And each of these objects is part of a resource group to group these resources together. It's usually deployed to a location or in the Azure region. And then it's also part of a subscription. Now, this is all done by Azure Resource Manager. And I think this was a very good investment we did very early on with Azure, because we realized in the cloud, you have so many resources to manage, and you need to actually have a great tool to manage these resources at scale. And people liked it so much that they said, well, why can we not just use this instead of just managing Azure resources? Why not also bring in resources which are running outside of Azure? And that is exactly where Azure Arc comes in. And it helps us bridging these resources from on-premises or other cloud providers into Azure. And to show you that quickly, what I want to do here is I want to limit the view a little bit. So I'm going to click on type. And I only want to see right now my servers, right? So for that, I'm going to first select my Arc enabled servers. So these are servers running outside of my Azure environment. Some of them are running underneath my desk here in my little data center. Some of them even run at other cloud providers. So I'm going to select these. And you can see I already have 10 of these joined. And I will show you a little bit later on how you can add a server to that. What you also can see here, as I mentioned before, it's not just for servers. It can also be for Kubernetes clusters and SQL servers. And then they show up. But now, let's just say instead of just having the Arc-enabled servers, let's also have the Azure virtual machines side by side. So now, in my view here, you can see here, I can see all my servers running across my environment. So I get an inventory of that. And you can also see that these Arc-enabled servers, they're also part of a resource group. They're also joined to a location, and they're also part of a subscription. So they really are a native Azure resource. They're not just something which we just like showed up in the portal as a resource. The trick behind it really is that they're natively integrated into Azure.
So it's beyond just like visualization, and it becomes something that shows you this is just as much relevant and part of my resource group that I'm have my Azure SQL and Azure VMs. It's all part of that same view. And so I'm guessing that you can now go to one of those individual Arc-enabled servers and manipulate them from the Azure portal somehow.
Absolutely. And I'm going to show you that in just a bit. But you're absolutely right that this is one of the critical points here. I can now also go out and use things like tagging, right? Because it is a native Azure resource. I can add a filter here and, for example, filter for a tag. I have one for cost center. So I use that tag and I want to list all my systems from one specific cost center here. So I limit that to cost center 1002. And I can that apply now. And now you can see I have all my servers, which are running in Azure, but also on-prem or even at other cloud providers in one single view. And I can use the tagging for that. Now,
so if it's like two different departments, like say, maybe like the security department has a couple of servers they're responsible for. Maybe there's specific use cases. So the way I imagine it, Thomas, is like if we have dev, so different environments, a dev environment, we could tag them as dev. We have an environment for production or QA. We could put those in so we can kind of separate them in this view in the portal when we need to.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. The same way you would actually do this with Azure resources. The point now is really that you can do this now with resources outside of Azure. And again, you're absolutely hitting the nail here on the head. It's like you can use it for tagging your different environments, your cost centers. You can use tags for all sorts of tooling. But what you also said before, you said like it's not just the UI thing, right? And you're absolutely correct. So what I'm going to show you here is I'm going to show you Azure Resource Graph. Now, for those who don't know Azure Resource Graph, this basically gathers all your all the information about your Azure environment. So it's a very fast system to actually get information like how many virtual machines do I run, what networks do I have, and so on, right? If you ever run like a get ACVM PowerShell command, if you have a couple of like hundreds virtual machines in Azure, this can take a while. But Azure Resource Graph actually does actually cache this information, so I can run queries against it using the keyword query language. And what I did here is I already prepared a query here. Oh, let me see that. I think that was the wrong one. Where I can list my Azure VMs, which have the resource type Microsoft.compute/virtual machines. So those are actually the resource type from Azure Resource Manager for Azure Virtual Machines. But then we'll have one for our Arc enabled servers, which is hybrid compute machines. So I'm going to run this query. And this is now querying that from the Azure Resource Manager. And you can see here now, obviously, I get a list of all these machines. I could also run that query directly from the Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell, or query, like use the API to get that information. But it's exactly the same thing, right?
So I have a question that came in, and let me bring it up so everybody can see it. So Robert McDonald asks, could I use tagging for policies across different servers?
That is a fantastic question, because that brings me directly to my next point. And yes, you can. So this is absolutely, like, this is not even planned, but it's absolutely great. So the next thing I want to show you is, obviously, you don't want to just get visibility inside your environment, right? Visibility is one thing, and it's great to have that. But you would say, Thomas, well, I have a list of all my servers. I know what's going on. Yeah, but you can do more. And so this is where it comes about, like, govern and manage your environment using, for example, policies. Now, for people who are not familiar with Azure Policy was initially basically designed to configure your Azure environment, to make sure that developers and IT pros can still leverage the speed and agility the cloud offers, but lets the cloud team to be in control, right? To make sure that not everyone can go out and deploy to every Azure region, for example, or not deploy every size of virtual machines, because we have these great MV2 series virtual machines with a couple of hundred cores, terabytes of memory, and they drain credit cards within seconds, right? So we don't want everyone to deploy these, and Azure Policy can help with that. Now, another part of Azure Policy, what a lot of people don't know, is that we also have something called Azure Policy Guest Configuration. And this allows us to basically go out and audit the operating systems of virtual machines running in Azure. Again, works for Linux and Windows servers. With Azure Arc, we can now extend that capabilities to servers running outside of Azure. And absolutely, let me quickly show you how you would actually leverage that. So what I would do is I would first create a new assignment. Now, I will take or assign here a new initiative. So an initiative is basically a collection of policies, because we can do some additional stuff while grouping these different policies together. I would then select the scope here. And as already people pointed out, now by default, it selected my subscription, but I can also do that on a management group or on a resource group. And I can also build like exclusion depending on, for example, tags, or add information depending on tags, right? So that is a great use case for that as well. And I can then select the definition. Now, this is actually the important part. Azure really offers a couple of built-in definitions. So if I switch here to the built-in one, you can see here I have a list of different Azure Policy definitions. Now, if I scroll down here, you can see I have a couple of them, which are, for example, very technology-focused ones, right? To make sure, for example, we have the Azure monitoring enabled for servers, right? But you can also see that I have a couple of them which are actually industry specific, right? So we have things like if you need to follow like the industry certification for ISO or for others, like the
MPAA. Yeah, like the
exactly.
MPAA one looks really, because they have certain policies over, what can be secure, what cannot, as far as like access to their intellectual property that all their members have. So it makes a lot of sense that Azure says, you know what, let's apply these policies, and rather than having to script it out into something, let's just use these built-in definitions. That's a really, really cool part of this.
Absolutely. And I mostly tell people, look, even if you don't have the requirements, like have a closer look at these and maybe they already help you to do the same thing, right? So you can actually go and you can also build your own. It's in a JSON format. You can build your own. We also have a GitHub repository where you actually can go out and people are sharing and contributing to that Git repository to get more policies out there. Now, in my demo, I want to show you a very simple one, which I actually like and makes a lot of sense also for my environment, is I want to audit my machines for insecure password settings. So I select that built-in policy. And what I now would do, obviously, in a production environment, I would obviously change the name here to something a little bit more useful and give it a description. And again, if you've done that before, that's great. That worked for your Azure environment. But if I go down to the next step, you can now see that I get a new set of parameters here. I can now tell that definition if it should include our Azure Arc enabled servers. So meaning servers which are outside of Azure. By default, we say, well, it's only like you probably only want to use it for Azure servers. But now in my case, I really want to use it for all my servers across my environment, right? So that is how I would enable that. And then I would obviously go through the wizard and basically apply this and say, well, okay. And then it will take a while to actually go out and audit all my machines.
Sure, like you might have to go through like the AD tree and start going through across the domain controllers, get the policy within there, and then eventually apply those policies to our additional machines that we may have not on Azure, but in another data center or a co-located place.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this then obviously takes a while. So like in a good cooking show, I already prepared something here. So if I switch back to the policy overview page, what I can do here is I obviously want to now see how compliant I am, right? So I go to the compliance view and we can now see here a couple of things. I can see, first of all, that I do a very bad job when it comes to compliance. You can see here, if I scroll down, you can see here all the policies which are assigned to my environment, and I can see which one I am not non-compliant and to which ones I'm actually compliant. Now on the top, I have already assigned the server one here. So this is the one I just showed you before, which goes out and audits password settings of my servers. And you can obviously see what is actually audited here, down here, and you can see the different policies, and you can see like, okay, some of them are, for example, like age restrictions of the password, how long is a password allowed to be used, and so on. You can actually all find that information here. But more interestingly is now what resources are actually non-compliant. So if I click on that, you will see that I obviously have a couple of Azure servers which are non-compliant. But if I move over here to the resource type, you can also see some of my Azure Arc enabled servers are also not compliant. So some of my servers, which probably are running underneath my desk here, are also not compliant with these password checks. So this is actually now great. Like if I'm a compliance responsible person or a security administrator, I can actually push out these policies to my whole environment and get a report on that back. Doesn't matter where this server or the system is running. And I speak now about servers, but obviously this also works with Kubernetes clusters, for example.
Okay. Yeah, which is important because a lot of people are containerizing what it is they're building. If you want to see what Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes is, check out this URL, CDAMS26R. That'll take you right to the documentation, but don't go there quite yet. So, Thomas, I want to take a second, and I want to just bring this up. I think you might enjoy this. Isadora is watching it on the big screen, and I love when people share this type of stuff. Very, very fun. And also, I want to remind everybody that we do have our poll. And so if you head over to LearnTV, that's aka.ms/LearnTV, you'll be able to take our poll And obviously, it's right there. It's do you currently use a hybrid or multi-cloud solution for your IT needs? If you do, let us know. So Thomas, we're about 35 minutes in, and I can't believe how much we've covered already.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's like, it's always nice to talk to people who understand like the needs, right? And I'm always enjoying this. It's also funny, by the way, that the poll already said 50%. Depending on some IDC studies I just learned, it should be at the end. It should be over 80% should be for multi-cloud and hybrid solutions. At least when we have all the audience watching. So really looking forward to see more votes here for that.
So we got a question from Rohit, and Rohit wants to know that he currently has Splunk collecting his audit logs. He wants to know if he can do the same in Azure, including his Palo Alto firewall, which I would imagine is probably some sort of like device that's virtualized.
Yeah. So this is actually a good point. It's not necessarily directly connected to Azure Arc, but we have a service, for example, which would be Azure Sentinel, for example. Azure Sentinel is our cloud-based SIEM solutions, which you can gather all kinds of logs. And obviously, also that service is designed to be hybrid. So you can actually get your on-premises security logs into Azure Sentinel. And from there, then obviously do threat mitigation and threat hunting and stuff like that. So to bring that together. So that if you want to look at that, definitely have a look at Azure Sentinel. And I think the products you just mentioned, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not an expert on Azure Sentinel. But I think there are even already connectors for exactly these products. So it's probably not even that hard to integrate them, or where you need to build any like some sort of custom connector or anything. There are probably already connectors for these specific solutions coming in.
Cool. Very cool. So we got about almost 20 minutes or so left. And so if you got any questions, everybody, you see we've got some already answered. Make sure you hit that chat. You let us know. So what do you got for me next?
So now I showed you a little bit already what you can do with servers which are already onboarded, right? And again, I don't want to leave you out there and like say, well, people now think, okay, it's probably going to be very hard to onboard all these systems. So let's have a look on how that actually works and how you can add servers or Kubernetes clusters to Azure, and then also have a look on some more management capabilities, because policy is not just the only thing you can do. Does that sound good? Perfect. I think I lost audio, but I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, I hear you. We're okay.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Perfect. That is, by the way, we are live, right? So take the chances to ask your questions. So if you want to onboard your systems to Azure using Azure Arc, the simplest way is actually to search into the portal for Azure Arc. And you can see here, it's one of my favorite places to go. And this will take you basically what we call the Azure Arc Center. And this is actually where all the Azure Arc connections and all the management is happening, where you actually onboard these servers. I also want to quickly show you, I mentioned a couple of things Azure Arc can do. It can actually manage your existing infrastructure, but it can also, for example, deploy Azure Arc enabled data services. So this means we don't have much time to talk about this, but again, if you want to run Azure SQL in your environment or PostgreSQL as well, then have a look at this. This feature, by the way, is currently in public preview, so you can check it out. It's even free to try. So please have a look at that as well. Now, on the left side here, you actually see the menu here. You can see here all the resources I can onboard. You can see here we spoke about servers, Kubernetes clusters, SQL Server, but you can also see that I can onboard Azure Stack HCI. Now, Azure Stack HCI is our hyper-converged infrastructure solution to actually do virtualization. And it is delivered as an Azure service in your hybrid environment. And so it has Azure Arc built in into that system. So that is also just something I want to mention. But I promised you, I want to show you how to onboard actually a server. So for that, I click on server here, and you can see here all the servers I already onboarded to my Azure environment. Now to add a new one, I have a simple add button here. And what this does, it gives me two options right now to onboard new systems. And as you can see here, it's not going to do like something super magical. These are actually wizards to generate the script. The way we're doing this is actually, it's a agent. You're going to download that agent. You're going to install that agent. And then you're going to run a command to register that specific agent to the Azure environment. And these scripts are going to help you do all of that. So you don't even need to go and do that all manually. We just create the script using these wizards. And you probably ask yourself, like, what is the difference of adding a single server versus adding multiple servers? How would that be different? Now, if you add a single server, at the end, when you run the registration script, you will need to log in to your Azure environment. So that obviously doesn't really scale very well if you need to onboard multiple servers, if you have hundreds of servers or thousands of servers. You don't want to run the script on each of the server and then log in with your Azure account. So what we can actually do here is we can create a service principal in Azure, which has only rights to onboard these servers. And so the script will be generated using that. But for the demo, let's just generate a script for onboarding a single server. And the first thing, I get some more information about the prerequisites, which is actually good because then I can talk about this. So we just need to install an agent, and that has outgoing traffic to some Azure APIs using port 443. So it's all encrypted as well. And you can find the outgoing URLs for your firewall to configure on-prem directly here on the documentations page. You will also need to have local permissions to one time install that specific agent, right? So that is something you need to do. And then you need to have an existing resource group. So when you actually join that server, that you can actually join it to a resource group, because all the Azure resources need to be part of an Azure resource group.
Very
so
cool.
the next, absolutely. So in the next step, you can actually then go and say, okay, to which subscription should that server be joined? And to which resource group should that server be joined? So I already prepared the resource group here. I then also select the closest region for that specific server, right? That server is not deployed in Azure, but it needs to connect to some Azure APIs. And we have a couple of regions where you can select to which one you actually want to join. In my case, the closest region in this case is West Europe. There's no data necessarily stored there. I could also select West Europe or West US or whatever to do that. It's just then obviously there's a little bit more latency involved into that. And it's going to be only metadata which is stored on that location, like server name and stuff like that. The next thing I would choose, is this a Windows, will this be a Windows server I'm onboarding or Linux server? That obviously depends on how the script will be created. If we do a Windows server, we will get a PowerShell script. If we do a Linux server, we get a shell script. So let's just do a Windows server in my case. And then I will add a proxy URL. If you're behind the proxy, you can do that as well. And then we also already give you the option to add tags to that resource. Now, you can always add tags later on, right? There is nothing like stopping you. You can even use policies to assign tags. But we give you a couple of recommendations because this server is obviously not part of Azure. We give you would be great probably to add some location specific information, like in which state of your data center this server is running. You can always use your custom tags. Like for example, I could now add my cost center tag there as well. On the next side, I then finally get the script, which I'm going to run. And if I zoom in here a little bit, you can see here with the quotes, actually with the comments, first of all, it's downloading the package. So download in the Windows world, this would be an MSI file. It installs that. And then the last command is actually the most important one. This is actually which one, like to register the server with Azure. So now I would actually go and copy that or download the script. There is a download button here on the bottom, and then go to my specific server. Now, I really don't want to spend time installing that, but I will show you what actually happened to the server itself here. So here I'm on a server, and I will go quickly show you what the host name of that server is, just so you trust me here that I'm not faking anything.
There it is, App 01.
Exactly, App 01 directly here. That's going to be the server, and I will show you that quickly in the Azure portal later on. Now, there is now a process running for that agent, right? So if I look at that, that is actually the server. Like if you ever wonder what the process is now, this is the process from the Azure Connected Machine agent, or as I call it, the Azure Arc agent. And so I can do a couple of things with that agent. So I can go and say Azure Connected Machine agent. And actually I get like some help here, some information, what I can do with that. Obviously you can see here the connect command here available. I can also disconnect it if I'm done. I can also get some additional information. Now, since this server is already registered, what I can do here is I can just do the show command. And this will now give me some information about this server. So as you can see here, I can now locally on that machine see that this server is part of which resource group, or part of which subscription, the tenant, which ID it has, and some additional services which are running. So that is pretty cool.
Yeah, information gathering is always important, especially if you're auditing stuff and being able to just get it there. And also in the portal. I think that that's one of the really big advantages of using these like interconnected services between different places like multi-cloud or on-prem is the idea that when you do need to do some auditing, you need to collect information. It's centralized. And I think that that's one of the big things that we strive for in using cloud technology is making the most out of the services that are offered to us, and then creating some centralization around all those services so that we reduce the complexity of how many things we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And another cool thing I quickly want to mention, I'm not going to do too much about it, but you can see I have a VM ID. And so what does this actually mean? So every Arc-enabled server gets a managed identity. So as you're probably familiar with managed identity for Azure virtual machines, you can leverage that and then actually like take that as a way to authenticate against Azure AD to either access Azure resources or within your applications, right? So developers can make use of that. When they write applications, they can now take advantage of that managed identity. And I was actually speaking with some of the Microsoft Identity team members, and they said, well, basically they just join service to Azure Arc just because of that feature, so that they actually can take advantage in their application from that managed identity.
Very, very cool. Let's take a look at yep.
Yeah, so now let's jump back in, and you can see here is my server, App 01, in the Azure portal. And again, as soon as you install that agent, it will take a couple of seconds usually, and then it shows up here in the portal. And then if I go to that resource, I can then find some more information. And so this is what hopefully everyone was waiting for. How does actually a server, like an Azure Arc-enabled server, look like? Now, first thing you can see, it looks like an Azure resource, right? It looks here, if you look at this, you can see here, join to a resource group, join to a location, part of a subscription, part of a resource group, as I mentioned. And then also tags here available on the bottom. On the right side here, you can also see that I get some specific Azure Arc enabled server information. So I can see actually that this server is actually joined to a local domain. So it doesn't need to be domain joined at all, but I get that information here. I can also see which operating system that server is running, and I get all that information right here.
Right, for our buddies over at Tailwind Traders, I think anybody that works in the Microsoft Cloud Advocacy team knows that company oh too well.
Yep. I still think we should have T-shirts made with that, and I'm sure someone had, but I definitely need one of the Tailwind Traders T-shirts. If you move over to the left side here, you can see here that I have like the overview page. I have an activity log, so I can always see what happened to that resource. But most importantly, I think this is something which is highly underestimated. I now get the access control, meaning I get RBAC, right? Role-based access control. And so I can use Azure identities to provide like access to that server. So what we have is, for example, we have now customers using Azure Arc. They connect their servers up. They take the rights away from their application administrators on these servers locally, and they only give them access inside the Azure portal to that resource. So they can if they want to manage that server, they need to do it through Azure Arc, and then they get additional benefits like the activity log directly connected. And so that is a pretty cool way. And I obviously, not everyone needs to see all the servers. Usually, if I'm an admin, I only need to see the servers which I'm working on.
Absolutely.
Now let us have a look a little bit on what we can now do, like what cool things we can do here. So first of all, security. This server now, I also have it additionally connected to Azure Security Center. So I get recommendations. You can also see that Azure Defender for Server is now on, even on a server which is not running in Azure. How cool is that? You can see here, I got my recommendations, what I should do. You can see here that I have like a couple of updates which are probably not installed. And I can see here that I also get a priority set on what I should do, as I know from Azure Security Center, right? It takes the same capabilities. It's exactly the same. It also shows up in Azure Security Center. Now, even more, we can now go to logs. So we get all the benefits of log analytics. So if I go here, I can actually like upload all the system logs or the event logs of that system, right? And I can now use the keyword query language to actually get the logs of that system. So I don't have to go and connect locally to that system, open up Event Viewer or all of that. And for those who are familiar already with this, they probably would say, well, Azure Log Analytics was available for servers outside of Azure for a long time. Yes, absolutely. And it's exactly the same technology, but with the big difference that we now have role-based access control. And before Azure Arc, what you would need to do is actually you would need to give someone access to the log analytics workspace. So he would see all the logs of all the servers and all the systems connected to that log analytics workspace. Now here you can see that we have a scope, and that scope is only set to be app01, right? So what I can do here, I can run, for example, a query for performance data. If I run that query, I will get here all the results here, all the log information. And obviously I can do that for other logs as well. So for security events and so on.
Gotcha. Hey, Thomas, I wanted to bring this up really quick. We've got another tweet from another viewer at Stephen Simon. He's watching us live. I just wanted to say thank you, Stephen. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, Stephen is a great guy. Absolutely happy to see him. Hope he's doing well. And hopefully he reaches out. We should have another chat, definitely. To go on, these logs can also now be used, for example, for monitoring, right? So I get in Azure for my Azure VMs, I have Azure Monitor, and I can leverage Azure Monitor also for my Arc machines. So the first thing I want to show you, Jay, here is, and the viewers, is here I get some monitoring from performance information. So I can see my logical disk performance. I can see actually some overview, how much is used and so on. All the important data I would get, not just for Azure VMs, but now also for my servers running outside of Azure. And I can see here like all the information I need, not just some randomized information. I actually can really find out, like, for example, even disk latency and stuff like that, which can be really, really important to troubleshoot things, for example.
Absolutely.
Now, the next part I want to show you is the map. I love this one. This is
I love visualization.
It's great. It's so helpful, especially when it comes to troubleshooting or even the migration scenarios, right? So this is done by the by the dependency agent or dependency extension. So you see here my server, the app01. If I zoom in here a little bit more, you can see here. And I can see here that 7 clients are actually connecting to that server. And I can also see that that server is connecting to different endpoints. So if I look at this, for example, I can see here, I call it endpoints. It says servers here, but obviously this can also be some sort of API endpoint. So let's have a look to what IP addresses and URLs this server is connecting to. So I can see here is connecting to a couple of different public IP addresses. I can also see here that it connects to some URLs. And on the bottom here, you can even see that the one thing where the Azure Arc agent connects to. So on the bottom, you can see here actually the URL. And that is done like the Azure Arc agent running on that machine is connecting to that URL. And I can see that within this dependency agent. Now, this is obviously not just working for public IP addresses. It also works in my local network. So if I look at some other port here, you can see here that this server also connects to some local resources as well. And this is great, again, if you need to troubleshoot or if you need to migrate systems, you actually want to know which applications and which servers are connecting to each other. This is really, really helpful.
Very cool. So we're down to about, I guess we got about 4 minutes left.
Okay, so I will go really, really quickly to show you some other things, some great ideas here. So one thing I want to show you what we also can enable is change tracking. This is also something which we can see actually what changes are happening to that system. Get all that information right here. I can see here when services are changing or software is installed. And speaking of installed software, I also get an inventory about software installed. So you can see here which patch. Yeah, so you can see here which patches are installed. You can even search. So in this server, I want to see like is Edge installed on that server. So on that server, I don't have Edge installed, but if there would be, I would know about it. I can also see services. Now, the last thing I want to show you quickly, really, really quickly, is update management, because I know that many of the system administrators out there or people who need to take care of systems are actually need to think about updates, right? So what I can see here under updates is which updates are missing, right? And obviously, since I regularly patch, I'm a good admin, I regularly patch my systems. These are just you can see here, it's only the preview update which is missing. So I'm still compliant. However, I want to have all these updates installed. So what I can do here is I can quickly schedule an update deployment. I can give that a name. Let's do that, call that app01 FunBytes. And obviously, it recognizes that it's a Windows machine. I can see here, I can set different maintenance settings. I can say, okay, should it reboot? Reboot if required, sounds good to me. I can always say, like, always reboot, for example. And then I can go out and schedule this. Now, I can say update now. Which would then kick off the update process in like 5 to 10 minutes. But since I'm still on AzureFunBytes, I don't want to do it now. So I can actually schedule that for the future. And since I'm lazy, I probably would even create a recurring task so I don't have to always do that, right? So I can say, well, every Thursday after AzureFunBytes, we are actually going to install these updates. I have other options. I can then obviously say which classifications of updates I want to install. This is really depending on, because it's a Windows machine. I can include and exclude updates. I can run the pre and the post script. At the end, I would review that, and I would actually create that update deployment. Now, one last thing. You would probably say, Thomas, well, I have hundreds of machines. I don't want to do that for each of the machines. Yes.
I see manage multiple machines up there.
Yes, so we got you there. Because this is using actually the Azure Update Management Service. So if I click on this, it brings me back to the Azure Automation account where I have the Update Management solution. And in the list here, I can see all my servers here, Linux, Windows, Azure VMs, non-Azure VMs, non-Azure physical machines. I can see which updates are missing in general. And then I could schedule an update deployment here, with the only difference actually being that instead of just selecting one server, I would select a group of different servers and then actually like say, okay, schedule the same thing and say, well, let's schedule that for that machine. So that is the last thing I just want to show you.
Very cool. Hey, here's the answers to our poll. We had most people, it was 60%. So not quite that 80, but very, very close. Hey, Thomas, we are at the end here. I just wanted to thank you. I know it's already evening time where you are in Switzerland. Thank you so much for being part of the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Jay, for having me. It was absolutely awesome, and hope I will be back in another episode.
I can't wait to have you back. We'll talk about that. Absolutely. For myself, for Thomas, we're going to give you the big wave goodbye. We'll see you next time here on Azure FunBytes. Take care, everybody. There it is. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.